Hello everyone, this is Robert, and today I'm going to be making a birthday present for my wife. I'm going to be making her an anvil stand for her new anvil. You heard that right. Let's get started. The anvil we picked for this is a 65-pound Doyle that you can find at Harbor Freight. It's about 130 bucks. You can also find a variant of this on Amazon under the Vivor brand, and I think that's about 120 bucks. So they're relatively inexpensive for a beginner entry-level anvil. Of course, we could have gone used, but at least in my area, everything on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist is extremely overpriced. People want a lot of money for their old beat-to-hell rusted anvil that was, just sitting out in the backyard for the last decade or so. So we ended up going new, and I think this is a great option for a beginner blacksmithing setup. When mounting an anvil to a stand, you need to make sure that the top of the anvil is at the right height. The general rule of thumb is that it should line up right with your knuckles. So if you have your arm down to your side, the height of the anvil should hit right there. I'm taking a few measurements just to make sure that the base of the stand is going to be appropriate, and you'll see later what I'm doing with the bottom of the anvil. Wood is an ideal material for an anvil stand, and thankfully I have a bunch of these 6x6 landscaping timbers that have been sitting out in my yard. So the idea is to take these, cut them down to about 24.5 inches, and then glue and bolt 4 of them together to make a nice sturdy stand. But it's much easier said than done. This is where things started to get a little bit tricky. So these are 6x6 timbers. The nominal size should be about 5.5 by 5.5. These are actually a little bit oversized at 6 1/8 and 6 1/8. So they're a little bit big, which is perfectly fine. The miter saw can really only cut about 4.5 inches, so I'd have to make 2 cuts. Do one cut on top, flip it around, do another cut. I thought this would be relatively straightforward, but because these aren't really straight or parallel or perpendicular to anything, as soon as I would flip it over for that second cut, the 2 cuts would never really line up. And I tried a square, I tried all sorts of different methods, and I just really couldn't get those cuts to line up, so the end of the cut was really ugly and stepped and staggered, and all of that is going to have to be sanded off or dealt with later, so I want to make sure that this cut is as clean as possible. So I have another idea. Hear me out. It's at this moment right here that I learned what jointers are for and what their purpose is. I tried running this beam through my planer to get some nice flat surfaces, so I'd have a reference, I could set that on the saw, cut it, rotate it, and everything would be good. But this really didn't work the way I thought. If I had a jointer, that would have been the tool to use. But unfortunately, with this little tiny planer, I ended up not really getting flat surfaces. I want to give a shout out to this little rigid planer though. It did a good job. It just cut a little bit more on the ends and less in the middle, so it kind of ended up with a bit of a cupped surface, which really doesn't help me out. And I do kind of want to preserve the patina on the outside, so I was really only going to do the glue surfaces. It was a good idea, but it didn't end up really giving me the surfaces that I wanted. So I have another idea. Hear me out. My wife reminded me that I have a horizontal bandsaw, and this ended up being the right way to cut these down. It has more than enough cut capacity, it has more than enough power. It's usually meant for metal, but the blade I had installed on this actually worked out perfectly for these larger beams. So I cut 4 of them at the 12.5 inch length. I knew that the cut wasn't going to be perfectly perpendicular. I'm not even sure what it's perpendicular to because the outside faces are all kind of wonky. So I know that I'm going to have to clean this up once everything gets glued together, but at least I have a decent cut now. Once the 4 pieces were cut down to size, I put them back through the planer and created 2 planed surfaces. These will be the inside glue surfaces, and hopefully that'll give me a better glue up with the whole thing, and I won't have gaps and stuff like that on the inside. But I do want to preserve the outside patina on the outside of the stand. Does anyone else hate glue-ups? Because I know for me it is my least favorite part of any woodworking project, and this one was no exception. It really went fine, but I did learn a few things. I tried getting those surfaces as flat as possible, so I kind of sorted through the 4 different pieces to see which ones would fit where, and just tried to arrange them so there was the least amount of gaps in those glued surfaces. And then I marked them and then, did the glue up. I'm doing this in 2 halves, so I'm going to put 2 of them together each, and then I'll glue those 2 halves together once everything dries. And it was fine. It was a little bit tricky just kind of getting everything clamped because they're relatively big, relatively heavy, and there's no flat surfaces. I know they look relatively flat and parallel and perpendicular, but they're really not. As soon as you kind of set one down, they really aren't. So it took a little bit to get everything clamped up together, but yeah, generally I think it worked out fine. The next day after the glue dried, I took each half and once again ran it through the planer. The idea was that I would get these nice, perfectly flat surfaces, those would glue together and I would have no issues, but it didn't really work out like that. No matter how many times I ran it through, no matter how many times I rotated it, I just didn't end up with 2 flat surfaces that mated well together. So I had to come up with another idea. Hear me out. I completely forgot that I have a CNC router. I put each half on the bed, clamped it down, and used a surfacing bit just to go over the top of it, face it down, and this worked out wonderfully. When you press them together, you can absolutely feel that it's making contact along the whole surface. It fits together well, and this is going to make for a really, really solid glue up without any gaps. And at this point in the project, I am just wondering how many more tools I'm going to need to use to get a rectangular block of wood made. I'm just surprised at how off the rails this whole thing has gotten so far. After a quick confirmation that the height is appropriate, it's time for the final glue up. This one went a lot better, and I do wish that I had done this surfacing on the very first step because these 2 surfaces just fit so much better together. And I'm doing something a little bit different here. I'm not clamping anything. I'm actually drilling some pilot holes for these 8-inch long lag bolts. I'm going to drill those through, then glue it, then line it up again, and then put in the lag bolts, and that will hold everything together. I'm going to end up doing a total of 12 of these 8-inch lag bolts, but for the glue up step, I'm just doing 4 of them just to hold the 2 halves together while the glue dries. Now that we have this big solid chunk of wood, it's time to get the top and the bottom relatively flat. You can't see me right now, but I'm doing air quotes because it really doesn't need to be that flat. It just needs to be good enough so that it sits on the ground without wobbling, and an anvil can sit on the top and it's, relatively flat. There really wasn't a good way to do this. I tried a hand sander, just a random orbit sander, but the amount of material that needed to be removed was way too much. It's a relatively big area. So I turned to an angle grinder with a flap disc, and this was an okay process. It took a while, but I think I have a better idea. Hear me out. Just kidding. I just kept going with the angle grinder for about an hour, using a square, just kind of checking for flatness. Once again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be relatively flat so it sits on the ground without wobbling. And yeah, after about an hour, I got both surfaces done. I went over the whole thing really quickly with a random orbit sander just to kind of get rid of the high spots, knock down the edges, just so there aren't exposed splinters. And then we're going to put in the rest of the lag screws. These are 3/16 8-inch long, and there's going to be 4 on 2 of the faces and 2 on the other 2 faces, and they're staggered so they won't run into each other in the center of the block. So I'm just drilling those out and putting them in, and now it's time to mount the anvil on top. So it's coming together. As you can see, I've got the anvil on the base. The size is really good. This is a nice sturdy platform. The height is right. Your hand hits right at the top of the anvil, which is exactly what you want. The next step is to get the anvil mounted inside the top of this. And what I'm going to be doing is using this little laser cut template. This corresponds to the 2 feet. I'm going to put this on top, route out these holes, and set the anvil inside using some construction adhesive. I've done a little bit of research and I found that that's a really good way to actually not only couple the anvil with the stand, but also damp the ringing that comes from it. Right now, it's just kind of setting on top. And as you can see, it is very loud. There's quite a bit of ringing coming off of this. So setting this inside with construction adhesive is going to help damp that ringing. It's going to couple this with it, and hopefully a lot of that's going to go away. At least that's the thought. I've got a bushing printing right now for the router. As soon as that's done, I'm going to route that out, squish in some goop, put in the anvil, and it should be pretty close to done. Before plunging the router bit down into the stand for the very first time, I did decide to double check all of these measurements. I did another version of this template without the offsets. Whenever you're dealing with cast metal, it can always be a little bit off. Things are generally not very straight or square, but thankfully the base of this anvil was really straight and square, and everything fit very snug. I just added a 1mm offset just to make my life a little bit easier. So then I grabbed the template, nailed it down, grabbed the router, and went at it. The total depth of the pockets is about 1/2 inch, and the idea is that half of that, so about 1/4 inch, is going to be filled with construction adhesive. The anvil is going to sit on top of that, so it'll sit about 1/4 inch inside the stand, and that'll give a nice secure footing for it. This is also why I didn't worry too much about making the top surface really flat, because the bottom of the anvil isn't perfectly flat, and the construction adhesive will give a nice mating surface between those two, and it'll kind of fill up any gaps or fill up any unevenness, and I can just kind of make sure that the anvil itself is flat and parallel to the ground. I was a little bit worried that the weight of the anvil would just kind of squish all the construction adhesive out the sides, and I'd have to be careful with it, but it was actually the opposite. I really had to kind of pound the anvil down into the construction adhesive, and I just used Loctite brand construction adhesive that I found at Lowe's. So I didn't use anything special, but it's fairly thick and it really supports the weight of the anvil well. So I just kind of smashed it down in there, made sure everything was kind of level, cleaned up the excess, and let it cure. It's been 48 hours, so the adhesive has had time to fully cure. So let's do the ball bearing test once again. Has the same rebound, but you don't have that ringing. So this is going to be a lot more pleasant to use and has a nice thud. And just for comparison, here's before. And here's after. Now all that's left to do is to forge some metal. Overall, we're both very happy with how this turned out. It was a little bit tricky to get to this point. Working with this larger 6x6 stock proved a little difficult with the tools that I had, but we got there in the end. The size is appropriate. The 4 6x6s is a perfect fit for that size of anvil. The height is just right. It feels comfortable to bang on, and it's very quiet. We can do this in the backyard and not worry about disturbing the neighbors, and it has a nice solid feel to it when you hammer on it. So yeah, we're very happy with the end result. And of course, you don't have to make yours this exact same way. You could probably get by just sinking a lot of lag screws into some 6x6s. You don't really have to face anything down or glue it together. That's just kind of how I did it. So as always, thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.